Hi everyone, I'm Evan Mitchell, music director of the Kingston Symphony Orchestra, and I'm here with Amelia Lyon, our principal flute. And together we are going to premiere a brand new web series for you today that is called Symphony Sundays. Now, Sunday afternoons are usually when we perform our masterwork series. Of course, the COVID pandemic has made that impossible for the time being, so we thought it would be nice to bring you a little snippet of one of our past performances on Sunday afternoons and have musicians talk to you about the music that we're about to play. So this is the very first Symphony Sunday, and it's a real delight to have Amelia Lyon with us. Thanks for doing this, Amelia.
No problem. My pleasure.
So the piece that we're going to play for you, for our audience, our virtual audience today, this afternoon, our very first Symphony Sunday, is a selection from Ryan Trew's First Symphony. And this is a piece that we premiered in January, just a couple of months ago. Seems like a lifetime ago, but it really wasn't all that long ago. It was a piece that we had actually commissioned Ryan to write, a full-length symphony, and he delivered what I think is a truly incredible piece of music. I confess, a little bit obsessed with this piece. I think it's beautiful. I think it's really remarkable. I think it's just filled with all sorts of greatness from top to bottom. It's in many ways actually like a Dvorak symphony in that it's really beautiful, but outside of the craft, you just get these random melodies that seemingly come out of nowhere all throughout the piece. It's one delight at a time. So we're going to be playing a chunk of the second movement. This is the beginning of the second movement, actually. That's going to be our excerpt for this afternoon. And this whole symphony, but particularly this movement, is a huge feature for the flute. Does that present a challenge for you as a musician who is encountering this new music like everybody else for the first time?
Absolutely. Always. And anytime there's a feature like that, it's terrifying. I mean, it's part of my job and it's part of what I'm trained to do. But whenever you get a piece that's brand new and you have absolutely no context, it's not like I can say that I studied the excerpt in university and I know what to expect when I see it on the program. All I see is a composer's name and the name of the symphony, and it's new to me like it is to everybody else to some degree. So seeing just how big a feature the second movement was. It's the second movement, right?
It's the second movement, yes.
Okay, good. Just how awful would it have been if I'd... Anyway, just how big the second movement was as a feature for the flute was definitely a little bit overwhelming, to say the least, although I was lucky in this context, as the second movement is a development of a pre-existing piece, a pre-existing theme at least, that Ryan had written for flute and marimba. Which I happen to have played before with you yourself, Evan Mitchell. So I was lucky in that sense, knowing going into it that he was going to be using that material again, and that I had already learned it and performed it at least once or twice. And so I was lucky in that sense. I had sort of a leg up that most musicians, when presented with a new piece, don't have.
Yeah. Well, the way that Ryan writes this movement, indeed the whole symphony, but again, particularly this movement, the part isn't really what I would consider to be a conventional flute feature. There's a lot of beauty in the solo, but there's an unusual rhythmic pattern, and almost immediately it goes all over the place. It flies away pretty quickly from a typical flute part. There is an internal structure, of course, but it's almost as though, and Ryan sort of has a real gift for this, it's as though he's writing something that sounds completely spontaneous, but of course was very carefully crafted to sound that way. Now, you were familiar with a bunch of this music, of course, as its previous life in the flute and marimba duet, but how did you approach this in the orchestral context, when you have to project a little bit more and you have to sort of hold people's attention in a longer period with everybody else around you?
You know, it's funny. It sounds like a cop-out, but the music sort of does that on its own. I really feel like I was intimidated by this and certainly nervous to play it. But the first time we played it in our first rehearsal in context, I basically just crossed my fingers, and I felt like I was closing my eyes and leaping into a canyon or something.
Yeah.
But it just worked. He wrote it perfectly for the instrument. He clearly has a passion and a love for the instrument himself, because there's although it was rhythmically difficult, there wasn't a whole lot else for me to do. I felt mostly like I was just taking what was on the page and launching it up. And the way that he wrote the line, interchanging with other instruments, and the way that it behaves, the way that it takes on a life of its own throughout the movement, it does it on its own. There was really very little for me to do. It does sound like a cop-out, but I mean it when I say the piece just kind of, it plays itself. It sounds like folk music, which it's interesting to hear you compare it to Dvorak, because it is a little bit like that, in that it sounds like it's a folk melody and it sounds completely improvised. And at least one of my colleagues did come and ask me and was like, are you improvising? Are you making that up? And I was like, no. As soon as you can take that rhythm, and I guess the one thing that I found really helped me to take this from being on the page to a live piece of music was taking the rhythm and moving it from being da 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 and like really, really specific and lined up, to making it sound as if it was improvised, and making it sound as if it was just made up on the spot and just kind of spun out of thin air like that. But it wasn't, I did not find it a difficult thing to do, because I found the piece just was written to hold my hand.
Well, that's something that I agree. I think Ryan does very well. In spite of the fact that he has a very unusual sense of presenting music and ideas. I'm going to say unusual. I think the appropriate adjective, it's fresh, it's interesting, it's engaging. It's engaging beyond everything else. But what he does is he makes it so that, like, once you understand where you fit in, there's a lot of freedom for you to just innately comprehend the line of the music. Like, it's not as though the music itself is obvious, but the melody is not obvious, but the direction is obvious. And so you're able to put your own signature on it, while at the same time being guided very clearly by what happens to be on the page. And I think that's a real strength, particularly when you're being presented with something that is absolutely brand new. Now, Ryan was actually there for the series of rehearsals and the performance, of course, and he was there to give feedback and to help shape the piece. Did that present any new challenges for you in the way that you sort of conceived things? I know that we actually, at the end of the third movement, we tried a whole bunch of different things about how we were going to end the little flute gesture that caps off the third movement. Again, the whole piece is really a big flute feature, kind of like a flute concerto with a very involved orchestral part, you could theoretically say. But what was it like to have the composer there to sort of give you guidance as we went through the rehearsal process?
It's always great to have a composer there. It doesn't, any time I've had the opportunity to work on a new piece of music with the composer there to give input and to help shape it as it builds live off the page like that, is always a huge privilege. And it's one of the best things, in my opinion, about performing new music, hands down, is that the composer's alive, and you can ask them questions, and you can say, what were you thinking here? And the occasional composer, and Ryan was definitely one of them, is someone where you can say, like, would it be possible to maybe change one or two things? And I mean, in all honesty, I don't think I changed anything necessarily myself, but you could ask him what he was thinking behind it and why he had written it a certain way. And he was really, really open to discussing it, which is great and really fabulous. Something that's unique about Ryan is he seemed just sort of thrilled with how it sounded the whole time. And so sometimes we'd be like, hey, Ryan, got anything to contribute? And he was like, nope, sounds great. And we'd be like, it didn't, though. Like, we're fully aware. But once we got past that, once I think he was a little bit more comfortable giving us feedback, it was great to have him there. You'd think it'd be intimidating, but you kind of get past that pretty quickly. Instead, it just becomes a really amazing resource that we, 95% of the time as a symphonic musician don't otherwise have.
Yeah. Well, the scope of this, it's of course, it's great that the piece turned out to be really wonderful. But on top of that, I think that it was just such a joy to be able to put it together, something that was so large in scope, that turned out so brilliantly, to be able to have a hand in bringing to the world this new piece that I think is something really very special.
No question. It's certainly the most substantial piece of symphonic music that I have ever been able to premiere, let alone even play, by a new composer, by a Canadian composer. So that was very, very, very cool to do. And I was proud of the Kingston Symphony for commissioning it and for getting in touch with Ryan and making it happen.
Oh, I totally agree. I think that it was absolutely a highlight of the season for all of us, and a very special event to be able to bring this great piece to life. And honestly, I can't wait to perform it again. I think it's remarkable. So it's my great joy to present to you the opening 2 minutes or so of the second movement of Ryan Trew's First Symphony. Thank you so very much, Amelia. It was great to have you on board the very first Symphony Sunday, and we hope you enjoy this wonderful music.